Hey everyone, if you're around this summer, you've got to hear this. The Canada Strong Pass is back. This summer, get out there and explore Canada for less. Nothing to sign up for, no pass to carry, just get out there and explore. Have an amazing summer, Canada.
Oops, Carney's plan to spy on Canadians is not going according to plan at all, and cracks are starting to form, so what's the scoop on that? Wow, this will never air on legacy media, but Carney's former boss demolished him live on the air of an American show. You're not gonna want to miss that one. The big problem with continuously attacking your allies is that, well, it backfires eventually, and we're seeing that with the Americans right now. But what did Carney say that pissed him off so much? And believe it or not, you kind of need to know how to speak English or French to safely drive a truck in Canada. And you know exactly where I'm going with this. My name is Elliot Daniel, and this is The Right Call. Like, share, subscribe, hype this video up. Any and all interactions on this video helps push the truth out and maybe someday break that CBC-induced coma that so many Canadians are under. And if you're tired of that same old government and media BS and finally want some common sense commentary, well, smash that subscribe button because you found the right place. Man, I can't wait to show you that video of Carney getting completely demolished. It's hilarious. You're not going to want to miss that one. But for now, after misunderstanding, federal officials are open to change on the Bill C-22, the police search power bill as they call it. Proof that speaking up, fighting back, and refusing to comply actually does work when done with a critical mass. So they say government officials were responding to concerns from civil liberty advocates, business groups, technology companies, and Republican politicians. I love to see that our southern neighbors are doing more to protect our rights than our own government officials do. Just so we're on the same page, the ability to obtain Canadians' private information and intercept communications, known as lawful access, is one of the most intrusive powers afforded to police and intelligence agencies. Creating such a regime for the digital age in Canada has been the subject of fierce debate for decades. That's what they're trying to do with Bill C-22, by the way. That also rhymes. The government went on to say, I think there may have been some misunderstanding on the intent of the legislation. No, I don't think so. I don't think there was misunderstanding. I think it was very clear. There just has been a lot of pushback you probably weren't expecting, especially from places you did not see coming. Of course, they won't go as far as admitting that this bill is absolute garbage, tyrannical, and downright incompatible with free society. But irrespective of their messaging, the government is feeling the heat. I don't think the government banked on so many tech companies pushing back against their agenda. Meta, Signal, NordVPN, Proton are but a few companies that spoke out very publicly against this piece of legislation. The Liberals thought that the era of tech companies doing the government's dirty bidding was still around. However, seeing as most of these companies are American, and ever since Trump got into office, we've been seeing a major shift in the way these companies operate. This probably surprised the government. Whereas under Biden, tech companies were used to censor, to silence, or to undermine users. Once Trump got into office, he convened the CEOs of all these companies and told them no more. He made sure personally that changes were made. You saw Meta appoint new members to their board and relocate their moderation team from California, which is very one-sided ideologically, to Texas, where perhaps it's a little bit more balanced. Google reinstated a bunch of YouTube accounts that had been shut down under the auspice of protecting the users, but truly it was just a mean to silence free speech. And of course, there's X that was bought by Elon, and accounts that were once the ban reinstated. The era of censorship is no more. Well, at least as long as Trump is in office. And sadly, Carney did not realize that, and it backfired because all these companies, when they looked at Bill C-22, said, it ain't happening. We're not gonna do the government's dirty work. We're not gonna spy on our users. We're not gonna keep their information for up to 1 year and give it without a court warrant to the government nilly-willy whenever they choose so. But you know what? It's sad to see that it takes another country's politicians, another country's tech companies to do more to protect our rights and our freedoms than our own media does, than our own politicians do. It really makes you wonder, just who are they working for? And speaking of working for, and in this case, working with someone, and this is really interesting, you have former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss on the Glenn Beck show, an American show, talking about our very own Prime Minister. Now, this is a woman who worked with Carney, dealt with Carney, and knows him deeper and more personally than any of our Canadian cheerleader media ever has in Canada.
Canada is, I mean, I look at it, I'm like, it's lost. I don't know how they recover. Canada went from this kind, polite little to a death cult with their medicine and their healthcare. Carney is, I mean, he is Mr. WEF. Now you have, Alberta that is thinking about, breaking away. That would be, I mean, what happens to Canada?
It's a terrible. And one good thing about Keir Starmer being so unpopular is that the assisted dying bill has been dropped, which would have allowed people to be killed on the state. So that's been dropped.
Oh,
so we're not going down the route of the appalling legalized suicide policies that they have in Canada. I was in Vancouver last week. Massive problem with homelessness, massive problem with drug addiction. When you see what's going on in the cities, it is atrocious, and it's a result of Justin Trudeau's progressive ideology. And Mark Carney has just floated in there. After ruining things in Britain, a lot of the problems we have are due to quantitative easing that made it very unaffordable for young people to get on the housing ladder. It was Carney who did all those policies in Britain that we are now suffering from. He then goes over to Canada to ruin their economy and ruin their. I mean, it's terrible. But it is the World Economic Forum ethos that we're seeing. This green ideology, this high tax ideology, this DEI ideology, and they spread it around the world. And one of the things I think the right needs to do more is to have that international, movement that is prepared to take these people on, because we're all fighting the same battle.
Amen.
Yeah, we're all fighting that same battle. And it's crazy to think that she got to witness what years of Carney can do to an economy. It ravaged the UK's economy. And you know what? It doesn't sound good for us in Canada, because unlike the governor of the Bank of England, the Prime Minister of Canada has a heck of a lot more power. So that is scary. And of course, this clip is never going to be shown to Canadians. But even if it made its way up the border to Canada, I bet the CBC would take more of its airtime to undermine Liz Truss and telling everyone how horrible of a person she is than to examine the claims and to look at what Carney is doing and his proven record in the past. This is what's so insidious, is that the media is completely co-opted into this protection racket of sorts to protect the government and to undermine anyone who speaks out against it. To quote an amazing letters to the editor that came out in the Ottawa Sun today, "It's highly unlikely that Mark Carney will follow the same political fate as Britain's Keir Starmer, because unlike Starmer, Carney is safely ensconced in the media's protection program by the major media outlets he finances. In the UK, much of the media are self-sustaining, financially independent. They have been hammering Starmer's terrible governments for a very long time, and it's starting to show. You're starting to see a shift in the public narrative against Starmer. Furthermore, Keir Starmer's party, the Labour Party, has only been in power for a few years, which means it hasn't had the time yet to spread its tentacles over every government agency, every department, every strata and sphere of society, and corrupt it from within. Sadly, in Canada, it's been over a decade of Liberal power, which means that they've had the time to put their accomplices, their allies, in pretty much every institution, including the media. To further quote the article, also, Carney has the luxury of having control over the federal courts and the Senate that Justin Trudeau loaded up with loyal Liberals. Yeah, that's a bit what I was trying to say. But I push it even further. He's created a system that makes him completely safe from public scrutiny. If the media won't talk about his downfall, about his issues, about his problems, then how are Canadians supposed to make up their minds? Most Canadians are good people. They just look to the media and believe that they are serving their best interests and reporting factually on what's happening, but we both know that ain't the case. And this is why it's even more important than ever for the independent voices to do the work that our legacy media renounced, to keep our leaders accountable. And this is where each and every one of you come in, because alone, your voices can't do much, but together, your voices are too loud to silence. Together, we can truly do anything. We can topple an empire. Share this video, but share articles, share documentation, share the truth, promote it, push the truth, and eventually, even emperors will fall. Now, this morning, the Governor General met with the King of Spain. Witness what her $400,000 a year salary gets us. Spoiler alert, it's a whole lot of not much.
Unfortunately, it's as short as always is for me, but it's
Thank you.
Why does everyone look so uncomfortable there? You know, it's almost like they're prisoners. It's like, hey, blink twice if you're okay. Wow, you know, like, anyways, look, she won't be around much longer because Her Excellency, the Right Honorable Louise Arbour, will be crowned the Vice Regal and begin lecturing us about the need for more mass migration and how saying otherwise makes us really mean. So that's coming up soon. So this is probably her last official act as Governor General. And look, I'm all for straightening ties with another country, although I don't know what the King of Spain and the Governor General of Canada can really do together. Apparently, right? Constitutional monarchies, apparently they don't have power, but I digress. Here's the issue though. But why are we prioritizing small, tiny economies over our southern neighbor, the Americans? Because Canada's trade relationship with the United States is, well, vastly larger than with Spain. We trade approximately $900 billion to $1 trillion annually with the US. Meanwhile, Spain represents 4.5 to 8 billion. Yeah. We trade up to 200 times more with the US than we do with Spain. And this reminds me of an analogy, the noise to signal ratio. Steve Jobs was well known to be a huge proponent of this. Every morning he would wake up, and even though there might have been 15, 20, even more tasks for him to do, he was well known to focus only on the top 3 things he needed to get done. The 3 things that were paramount, that were critical, that were necessary to push his business forward. He focused on the signal. Everything else around him was just noise. Well, the same can be applied here to Canada. Our biggest asset is the fact that we're neighbors with the world's largest economy and also the largest consumer market. It represents upwards of 26% of the entire world's market. So I say, let's focus on that signal. Let's put all of our efforts into strengthening this economic tie, into getting the best deal with them, into working together. Once we've secured that, then we can focus on the smaller economies. It's good to diversify, but let's not fool ourselves. We cannot and will never replace the US. So these kinds of state visits are costing millions of dollars for what? Meanwhile, we have our government that is ignoring the US, or worse, deliberately attacking and undermining them. And we'll look at that in just 1 second, because I have a compilation of all the crazy things and all the crazy attacks Mark Carney has said against the US over the last year. Also, let's take a second just to laugh. Public Safety Canada put out this tweet the other day. Public Wi-Fi is convenient, but using an unsecured public network can bring increased risks. Using a VPN protects your data. Learn more. And I gotta give it, this is why I love X. It was community noted. The community note says VPN providers like NordVPN and Windscribes have warned that they may exit Canada if Bill C-22 passes, as it requires electronic services provider to retain user metadata for up to 1 year and assist law enforcement with access, potentially compromising privacy protections. And then Canada Rose posted this meme. They want to ban VPNs with C-22, but at the same time, they're recommended that we use VPN to protect your data. Make it make sense. But legitimately, aside from joking around, I think there's an angle that nobody even considered here. Sure, in the government's infinite retardation, they created a paradox that clearly flew 40,000 feet over their head. But I think Public Safety Canada is pushing for Canadians to use a VPN exactly for that reason, because it would allow them to accumulate, to retain, and to gather more data on Canadians as part of Bill C-22. I think they're banking on that. They want people to use VPNs because it becomes just a massive surveillance apparatus at that point. They just probably did not count on X community noting them. And I hope if they posted this on other social media platforms, which I have not checked, they had some form of fact checker. They used those fact checkers on us forever, even though they were wrong. It's about time we actually use them on them when we're right. And speaking of being right, Pierre Poilievre a few weeks ago said, save our snowbirds, because he had heard that the snowbirds, which is Canada's Royal Air Force's acrobatic team of airplanes, which is really cool. I've seen them before at an air show. Amazing. But he had gotten wind that the government wanted to scrap them. And of course, David McGuinty, which is our Minister of National Defense, clapped back saying, this is false. Canadians can rest assured that they will be able to enjoy the iconic snowbird formation for generations to come. I'll be in Moose Jaw May 19th to say more. Well, this is what he said more about it. Minister announces snowbirds are grounded after 2026 with new planes scheduled for early 2030s. So Poilievre was right. And he lied to all of us. I love it. I love what 2 weeks can do. But let's be honest, there's 2 issues here at hand. First, it's the gaslighting. It's the constant government gaslighting. They can't look at us in the eyes and tell us the truth. They have to lie to save face, and then eventually the truth comes out. Look, if you have to ground the snowbirds, Fine, tell us why and be honest, be upfront about it. And even that they can't do now that they've admitted that they're grounding the snowbirds, because they're saying that it has to do with the planes. They have issues. There's engineering problems with the planes and they need to get new ones. But the squadron engineer didn't ask for the grounding. This didn't come from the people flying the planes. This appears, from all accounts, to be a political decision. Which brings me to point number 2. In a time when we're being sold that our national identity is paramount, that elbows up, that anti-American, that Canada first, that all these things are what we should focus on, why would you throw away a symbol of our national unity? The messaging and the actions are just simply not in sync here once again. However, I'll be honest, I'm not going to touch too much on this because I think there's far more pressing issues happening in Canada, but I did want to highlight just the gaslighting, the lies. It's important. We need to document whenever the government lies, because it's tiny little lies at a time that undermines the entire apparatus. So on the last video, I asked, should I cover more American politics? And most of you said, hell yeah, more American politics. One, it's more interesting, more entertaining, but also it affects us in Canada. So in that spirit, let's watch something that affects us very deeply in Canada.
We're also restoring integrity and safety to the American trucking industry. It was the policy of the last administration to allow for unqualified foreign drivers to get behind the wheel of a truck. Those days are over, and I think that's a bipartisan issue. We want safe commercial drivers on American roads. We've worked with states to cancel 28,000 illegally issued licenses for unqualified foreign drivers, and we are holding non-cooperative states accountable. We've also knocked more than 20,000 drivers out of service for failing to meet basic requirements, like reading our road signs or being able to communicate with law enforcement. These changes aren't just keeping you and your family safe from the road, they have the added benefit of boosting wages for hardworking American truckers.
Damn, it's good to see common sense. It's possible, okay? It gives me hope. It is possible to have common sense coming from the government. But here in Canada, this is a huge issue, and I'm sure most of you have witnessed it personally. And there's been no shortage in the media of tragedies stemming from unqualified truck drivers being allowed to drive on our roads. For example, truck driver who killed former Olympian Alexandra Paul in a multi-car crash sentenced to nearly 3 years in prison. This happened after Sukhwinder Sidhu was found guilty in February of dangerous driving causing death and dangerous driving causing bodily harm. Then there's the infamous Humboldt Broncos tragedy, the one where junior hockey team's bus was struck by an Indian origin truck driver who was subsequently charged for the tragedy. And although this is not in the article right now, he's been appealing his deportation order. He's been fighting to stay in Canada. And sadly, our woke judges are siding with him, which is such a sad story. When are we going to prioritize the well-being and the legal safety of Canadians? Then there's the case of a judge giving a trucker an absolute discharge in a fatal, dangerous driving case. All that in order to, again, save him from being deported. But I want to bring your attention to this tiny little line right here. Singh, who needed a Punjabi translator for the sentencing hearing. You'll see a common thread. And then another tragedy when an Ontario truck driver pleads guilty following fatal collisions in Saint-Philippe de Néry. Gunjinder Singh, a 34-year-old truck driver, pleaded guilty to charges of failing to stop after a collision resulting in death. He will be provided with a Punjabi interpreter for his next court appearance scheduled November 20th. To be honest, I could go on and on and on. There's no shortage of tragedies like that happening on our roads. But the one point that shocks me the most is the need to have an interpreter present in court. Because disregard the major question of why are we letting people into our country immigrating here if they don't speak the language at all. We used to have to pass language tests to become Canadian or to at least have visas into Canada. But you know what? I'll put it aside. I'll put it aside because, you know what? As long as people show their desire to learn the language and to integrate, I'm cool with it. I think it's normal. Not everyone comes from a background of knowing how to speak English or French. Fine. But no, the massive question here should be, how are these people acquiring CDLs, commercial driving licenses, if they can't speak English or French and thus can't read the road signs? That's the question. Why are these people allowed to work that way? This is such a systemic failure on the parts of our government that it crosses the line into criminal negligence, in my opinion. The government's supposed to protect us, and they're not only failing at this, but they're undermining it daily by allowing people that are clearly unqualified to drive on our roads. I remember when I got my driver's license when I was 16 in the province of Quebec, for example, not only did they make you do a theory test, they made you do a driving test, they also did an eyesight test. I remember You have to look in a machine. They have to test your eyesight. It kind of makes sense. If your eyes are poor and you can't see, well, you needed to get it corrected, or else you can't drive. That is too dangerous. You need your eyesight to drive. Well, furthermore, if you're going to pass a driving exam, how do you do it if you don't speak the language of the exam? If you need an interpreter in court, it shows me two things. One, you clearly don't speak it, but two, you've also not integrated, because all of these convicted individuals were in the country for many, 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 many years. I'm sorry, English is an easy language to learn. I learned it. I didn't speak a freaking word of English until I was 14. French is my native language. I learned, and I can tell you, not only did I learn it, but it took me like 3 months to become fluent. And sure, I still make little mistakes here and there, and you guys are always the first to point it out, and I love it. I'm all about it, by the way. I love to laugh at it. But come on, you've been in Canada for years as students or now on work visas, and you don't speak the language, and you drive a job that requires you to be able to look at signs and understand them. It baffles me. I am beyond comprehension of this. And there's no arguments that the other side or that any side can make to convince me otherwise. It's not okay at all. Now, on my last video where I talked about how the US is severing ties with Canada when it comes to military planning as part of the Permanent Joint Board on Defense, well, I did get a lot of flack. See, mostly due to the fact that now with the new CRTC rules that have been emboldened by Bill C-11, it means that my videos get pushed to all Canadians, not just Canadians that show interest in this kind of commentary, but rather all Canadians, even if they hate it. Now, what do you think that means? That means obviously it was pushed to a bunch of Canadians that have complete opposite views to you and I. And that's fine. I actually welcome it, because how else are you supposed to slowly shift the narrative and slowly open their eyes to the truth? You need to be able to get in front of their eyes, and I'm all about it. That's fine. But it also means that they attack you very strongly, and you know that a lot of the crazy talk comes from the left. They're always happy to be very violent, by the way, for a group of individuals that call themselves tolerant. They're definitely not tolerant about opposing worldviews, but I digress. What I want to bring your attention to is the biggest comment I kept getting about that video, and it's that F Trump, F him, we did nothing wrong in Canada, Carney is the best, it's all because of Trump, it has nothing to do with Carney, we're better off without the US, we are innocent, blah, 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 blah. Fair. Okay, cool. Aside from the obvious fact that no, we're not better off without the US, we are completely incapable of protecting our sovereignty without the United States. We have barely any military, we have no equipment, and we don't even have a fighting force with enough members. We're having to turn to foreigners to come and bolster up our ranks. And these foreigners, again, don't speak the language or are busy infighting, or worse, not even passing standards. I digress from that. Let's instead touch on the point that we did nothing wrong, that this is completely unwarranted, this is just Trump, and that Carney had nothing to do with this.
The days of our military sending 70 cents of every dollar to the United States are over.
The progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order.
Our old relationship with the United States, a relationship based on steadily increasing integration, is over. We recognize that the relationship that Canada has had with the United States, one that for more than 40 years has been based on steadily deepening integration, is over. From free trade deal through to CUSMA, deepening integration in military aspects. And that process of deepening integration is over. The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over. As I've stressed repeatedly, our old relationship, based on steadily increasing integration, is over. Of trade that was anchored on the United States, that we as a country have relied on since the end of the Second World War. A system that, while not perfect, has helped deliver prosperity to our country for decades. That system is over. That the old relationship with the United States that we've had is over. The truth is, over the last few decades, Canada has neither spent enough on our defense nor invested enough in our defense industries. We've relied too heavily on our geography and others to protect us. And this has created vulnerabilities that we can no longer afford and dependencies that we can no longer sustain.
Oops, yeah, maybe this anti-American rhetoric from Carney did piss off America a little bit. But who knows, right? We're Canadian after all. We can do no wrong. We're perfect. And the Americans better put Canada first at the expense of their own country if they're to deal with us. Or so says some liberals somewhere, somehow. Ugh, I can't keep up with that. If you've enjoyed this report and found some value in the commentary and want to get involved, well, like, share, comment, sub, hype the video, all the good stuff. But if you want to take it a step further and you want to contribute financially, I have a Patreon. The link is in the description. It's $8 a month, or at least starts at $8 a month. There's bigger packages. And all subscription helps me spend more time putting out this kind of research, this kind of content, and hopefully holding truth to power, because the CBC sure as hell won't do that. So all contribution is deeply appreciated. There's also a PayPal link if you just want to do a one-time donation. You have no idea how much this means to me. But for the time being, if you want to know more about the Permanent Joint Board of Defense that the US withdrew from and left Canada hanging on its own, well, click on the video right here. I made a breakdown of it and I explain what it was, why we should care, and where we're going with this. For the time being, though, my name is Elliot Daniel, and I'll see you guys in the next report.